Great. So they said that EHR would be better than paper, and in a way they were right in so many game-changing ways. EHR is better than paper. But most clinicians still today feel that EHRs are unintuitive is the word that tends to be used most. Unintuitive. They say it all the time in coffee rooms, and this little video was recorded. It was recorded about 12 years ago, and it distills the critiques of EHR, of the EHR experience. I'm just going to play you 30 seconds of it. And there's no sound. Okay, we'll do it with subtitles. So. It's rap, actually. It's rap. But it's a great, if you haven't got hours to look through the published critiques, it's a great 4.5 minutes of understanding why clinical usability is so weak. So 10 years ago, I was working in a London hospital, and they introduced EHR for the first time. My first EHR clinic lasted, well, it ran over by 2 hours. And, you know, whilst we gained legibility and remote access and shared data and all of that stuff, I still felt then, and I still feel today, that my EHR interface is unintuitive. And what I've realized since is that actually unintuitive can be unpicked. It's got this ethereal sort of idea that doctors and nurses will say, oh, I just don't get it, it's unintuitive. But actually, how do you unpick a term like unintuitive? And what I've realized is that paper records, if you're a doctor or a nurse or a physio, you know that you had a pen and your clinical reasoning went from your brain to your pen to the paper. So paper records are automatically, inherently a clinician-biased tool. So they're artisanal tools because we're the practitioners and we create the records that we use. But EHRs are not artisanal. They are made by multiple stakeholders, including a lot of people who are designers or developers, but they're not clinicians. And that lack of inherent clinical connection makes EHRs tend to be unintuitive. So after that first EHR clinic, I started drawing sketches on the bus on the way home about what I wanted my dream screen to look like for sexual health and HIV. And I took these sketches, I'll never forget, to 3 London medical school deans. They were the deans of the medical school, and I got a meeting with each of them. And the last one, I will never forget that. He said, David, we are in the business of saving lives, not drawing pretty pictures. But the Royal College of Art, which is a postgraduate art and design school in London, gave me a PhD scholarship. And it turns out that saving lives and drawing pretty pictures, they pretty much go hand in hand, because if a doctor or a nurse can make sense of the data in front of them, and if that data is clean and is open-air data, then that sense-making has a real clinical impact that's difficult to measure, but it is a real clinical impact. So the first challenge at art school, at design school, was to situate clinician sense-making within a visual framework. And Keim et al. Described these 4 challenge spaces. I won't go through these all, but I might just explain a few things. So cognition is how users perceive and reason with data. We all know what goals are. Diversity reminds us that different levels of experience or different levels of anything change how a user interacts with their interface. And collaboration is to me, is the big deal with digital, because digital collaboration is all about distributed cognition. You can have multiple clinicians and administrators working on the same data from, anywhere geographically. Data, the 4 Vs, I'll come to that. Design, I'll come to that. And technology, I don't think I need to tell anyone. Performance is how fast your machine can render something. Scalability is it won't break when you increase the volume or the complexity of the data. Integration standards, I don't think I need to go through that. So my research straddles data and design. And let's just talk about data first. So these are Keim's 4 Vs of data challenges. And a few years afterwards, a group led by Vivienne West, she looked at visualization, but specifically to do with EHRs. And she retermed variety to complexity, velocity to temporality, and veracity to uncertainty. And I think that makes sense because it resonates better with clinical data. So she looked at innovative EHR visualizations, and she drew some conclusions that they were using design principles. And there were 2 categories that she included, and the first is scale. Scale, if you're visualizing patient data, scale manages data. So it determines how much of the data we see and what kind of data we see. So scale deals with volume and complexity, meaning I'd say it acknowledges the characteristics of the data. So visual variables are basically things like color, shape, X, Y axis. Nominalization is basically you've got numbers which would ordinarily lie in a table or a line graph, but actually you can nominalize them, you can categorize them as normal, abnormal, equivocal. So nominalization is a really good way of preventing screen clutter. Time representation is the holy grail. Everyone loves a timeline, but there are other ways of representing time. And then uncertainty is a big deal with clinicians, knowing that a data point is shaky or not there or is not back from the lab. But the questions West didn't ask are the questions that clinicians might ask. And those questions are things like, what visual structures will support my clinical reasoning? The processes I use in thinking. How do I move from data to inference? Or how do I have an interface that is expressing knowing, not just seeing, if you get what I'm saying? So they hint at this third category called sense-making, and what I'm going to present to you today is 3 sense-making design principles that came from visualization but don't necessarily have to be visualized. I'm just going to put them up here and not explain them, but I will explain them later. And so this is kind of the crux of my PhD in design. And we use prototyping, quantitative research, qualitative research, reflection, and we involved the British Association of Sexual Health and HIV is called BASH. That's my national association, and the British HIV Association is called BEVA. So those are my 2 national affiliations. So I converted those bus sketches into these really basic interactive prototypes. This is a history view, so time is up and down. So this is a not classic, but this is a static time representation, right? So time is represented by space. It's an overview timeline of sorts. The second screen is a dynamic representation, which means that time is not represented by space, but they're snapshots of time. So that was a really basic prototype. And so we tested this prototype against commercial sexual health EHRs, none of the big names, using a mixed method survey. But the mixed method survey contained 12 Likert statements, and they were all around sense making. So they described situations to do with overview, pattern recognition, memory support, laboratory results, anything that might touch upon sense making. And the quantitative results from these Lickets were, well, they were encouraging. So the middle guy, commercial EHR1, these are net favorability scores from those 12 Lickets. EHR1 was overwhelmingly criticized. EHR2, the second commercial one on the right, was actually, in our field, considered the best EHR by a long way. And you can see that it did better, but it was still a pretty meh result. But what we noticed was that clinicians really liked what that prototype was giving them. And that's the prototype on the left. And then for the quantitative, you don't need to blow a gasket with this thing. We had about just under 500 coded responses, and we coded likes at the top in green and frustrations and suggestions for improvement in red. If you look at the likes, for EHR, mainly digital affordance were liked, but when you actually looked at the coded phrases, they were all to do with inherent digital affordances, so copy and paste, shareability, that sort of stuff. And they, likes, accounted for a fifth. Frustrations and improvements accounted for 4/5, and they were pretty much, not overwhelmingly, but mostly around review of data, reasoning with data, input of data, digital affordance, but they were asking for more than just generic digital affordances. They were asking for calculators and algorithms. And then a lot of people said, clinicians said, we want something that is tailored to the things we do every day, like the prostate. There was a talk on prostate yesterday. It was really good. It was a specific discipline EHR. So these 3 novel design principles. The first one is basically saying that clinicians want to access a really broad range of time when they're looking at a patient. They want to have a very high-level overview and very, very quickly go down to the granular level. Salience over time is basically, if a test is done today, it might, in a year's time, be very salient still. We might need to know that there was a positive syphilis antibody test or something. But a lot of data, when it occurs, after a week or so, it's still useful to know that it happened, but it's just lost its salience, and that's useful for clinicians. And the third one is the clinical data origins, and I'll explain that in the demo, because I don't think I need to talk to anyone here about the provenance of data. I'm just this is a demo video I've made. It's about 3 minutes. We've got no sound.
There are 2 fundamental ways to represent time visually, and Sticky uses both. On the left is a static visualization, the timeline, where time is represented as space. All events across 2022 are visible at once, organised into 5 vertical clinical domains. It's ideal for spotting patterns, gaps, and trends. On the right is a dynamic visualization, where time is represented as snapshots. Selecting a date, say 30 September, highlights the timeline with a red vertical line and synchronises the detail panels. Together, they form a dual representational system, one for overview, one for drill down, and I can move fluidly between them with 0 interaction, simply by shifting my eyes. This duality allows each representation to specialise, but also to support each other. The detail panels can offer instantaneous granularity because the familiar timeline layout maintains situational awareness. Conversely, the timeline offloads complexity to the detail panels so it can stay uncluttered through aggregation. The most common temporal questions clinicians ask are, has this test been done before? Has it always been normal? Has it ever been abnormal? In Sticky, these are answered visually, through the colour of the labels. let's go to August 13th. Grey means the test has never been performed before. Black means it's been done before, but never abnormal. Red means it's been abnormal at least once before. A small half diamond on the left shows the most recent test result, whether that was last week or 20 years ago. It's not a time cue as such, but a relational one. For example, this positive chlamydia test label is red, showing it's been positive before. But the teal half diamond indicates the most recent result was normal. You can confirm that on the timeline, positive here, negative here. Anything older, though, would mean swiping back over years, with the risk of missing a small red dot. The third design strategy came from observing a clear structural pattern in the dynamic paper sketch. The layout is arranged in 3 horizontal rows: measured data at the top, interpreted data in the middle, and inquired data at the bottom. In other words, it organises information not by type, but by how the data come into being. Measured data, like test results, body dimensions and measurements, are data of objective origin. Interpreted and inquired data, such as diagnoses, decisions, or patient narrative, are data of subjective origin. Maintaining a boundary between the two preserves evidential integrity, allowing clinicians to reinterpret objective data repeatedly without distortion. Sticky only visualizes data of objective origin, but in an ideal world, a partner interface would represent subjective data, giving 2 coordinated visual spaces, each with its own logic, but designed to support sense-making and interpretation together.
Okay, so to recap, scale is about managing volume and complexity. Meaning is about acknowledging the characteristics of the data. And sense-making is about seeing the data through an additional clinician lens. And extending principles to include this sense-making, it means that we can have EHRs that don't only support workflow, but they also support the clinical reasoning that leads to the workflow, or whatever order clinicians actually think and do. But it means that that extra clinical reasoning facet of an EHR interface is really what clinicians are asking for. And I have a question at the end. This idea that openEHR data is so beautifully raw or pure or objective, I feel that this kind of visualization research sits outside openEHR's remit, because the minute you start to look at data through any kind of lens, it's no longer openEHR type data. So really, the beauty of visualizing data, or the thing that is most useful for visualizing data, is to have a data source that is objective, trustworthy, and basically what openEHR supplies. Thank you very much.